Great. So awesome. All right. Well, Andrew's going to share the presentation. I couldn't figure out how to see my notes, so thank you for doing that, Andrew. So starting off, I'm going to be talking about my recent project, writing a literature review about agricultural viability indicators. And American Farmland Trust is a national nonprofit organization founded by farmers, ranchers, and conservationists in 1980. You can go forward. American Farmlands Trust's mission is to save the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. You can advance. A little introduction about myself. I'm the Pacific Northwest Training and Education Manager. I come from a fifth generation farming family based here in the Willamette Valley, and I have a planning, public policy, and management degree from the University of Oregon. I joined AFT in early 2025, just right before the inauguration. I am managing peer learning circles in Northeast, Central, and Southwest Oregon, and I'll share about my upcoming learning circles at the end of the presentation. I also am doing some land transfer support and business planning support as part of our national initiative on solid ground. You can advance. So for today's agenda, I'm going to review the project scope, talk about defining agricultural viability, discuss indicators used across academia, and the gaps in literature. To close out, we'll talk about some policy and programmatic interventions and have a discussion about how we can support farm viability in uncertain times. Great. So defining agricultural viability. This is this is an interesting one. Agricultural viability has been debated internationally over the past 40 years. Efforts to define agricultural viability have evolved from a limited understanding of financial sufficiency to a more holistic economic model that incorporates environmental and social sustainability to foster long-term success. Author Smale in 1986 characterized viability as earning enough cash income to meet basic household consumption needs, cover farm operating costs, and replace or maintain capital assets as needed. This also includes fulfilling credit obligations in a timely manner. Um, Adelaja in 2005 defined viability through a purely financial lens, arguing that revenue must fulfill both variable and fixed costs associated with operating, family living expenses, and asset replacement. And then in 2020, Barnes expanded the discourse of agricultural viability to include a broader consideration of economic stability and recommended integrating long-term net worth as a measure of financial stability. Um, then Grady, Lovelace, and Diamond argued that agricultural viability must support a decent livelihood for small, mid-sized farms while maintaining ecosystem health and rural community well-being. And then it just goes on. There's been a lot of, debate about what qualifies it. Spica analyzed why perhaps one definition could not be applied to all farmers and instead recommended indicators need to consider local factors to determine agricultural viability that include both quantitative and qualitative data. Farm viability is strongly influenced by context, as we all know. Specifying economic viability and creating operational and predictive indicators is difficult because economic viability of a farming system depends on a variety of attributes. In our recent farmer survey report of Puget Sound farmers, 52% of current farmer respondents shared that their farm viability means that their operations are profitable, earning livable wages for themselves and their employees. Next. So why define it if it's all over the place? Instead of locking in a singular definition, Academics and organizations seek to measure the key determinants that contribute towards on-farm resilience and how to support success across agricultural sector long term. Using a common language of viability indicators can translate to appropriate interventions such as place-based policies to reduce the impacts of land development pressures, assist land succession, and create regional programs to support infrastructure bottlenecks and institutional purchasing. Evidence shows that agricultural viability is highly contextual. Therefore, a toolkit of indicators is needed to account for both the macro and microeconomic trends and to interpret qualitative data through personalized farm surveys. Next. So on to the actual viability indicators. With no consensus on what constitutes agricultural viability within the scientific literature, organizations and institutions developed indicators that met their specific criteria for regional viability modeling. Early indicators used simple break-even accounting, expanded into economic longevity, and further evolved into holistic systems that account for economic, environmental, and social sustainability. In my literature review, I focused on relevant, peer-reviewed, qualitative, and quantitative agricultural indicators and assessment tools. Okay, so start off, next one, financial and economic indicators. It's gonna get really dry here, so bear with me. Um, Common financial ratios used as indicators include return on investment, debt to net income ratio, expense to income ratio, direct payments to producers and dependency, return to equity, profitability of sales, profitability of assets, percentage coverage ratio, and debt to equity ratio. These all illustrate an accounting perspective alone. These ratios can leave out important data about productivity and opportunity costs, and they should be defined as financial indicators instead of economic indicators. The modified farm net value added was developed to account for the difference between family farms operating on their own land and business entities farming across multiple leases. Author Spica recommended using the modified farm net value added to allow for the opportunity cost of owning land and non-land assets. It is a financial ratio that represents the amount available to remunerate all fixed production factors. This includes land, labor, and capital assets, either owned by the farm or external parties. This formula is an improvement on return on assets formula commonly used, but because the ROA doesn't consider owned or leased land. The original formula, the non-modified, refers to the total production value plus direct payments minus intermediate inputs, which is seeds, fertilizer, and feed, and includes the depreciation of capital assets. The modified formula accounts for the cost of labor, which Spica argues is critical in factoring the ability to cover total expenses and consider the opportunity costs of unpaid labor and owner equity. You can advance. So quantitative modeling approaches. Recent literature on agricultural viability emphasizes the importance of long-term economic sustainability. One way to measure long-term viability is with a statistical method called multinomial logistic regression. These model both short and long-term viability outcomes across data sets, effectively illustrating contrasting policy impacts to farm viability over time. This methodology emphasizes that viability is shaped by a range of factors over time and particularly highlights resilience in diversified farming operations, earning revenue from two or more agricultural enterprises. These are used a lot within the European Union. The interannual variability of net farm income is a calculation used by the USDA that reflects income after production expenses are subtracted from gross farm income. Both Barnes and Spica argue for the use of multi-year averages to determine the interannual variability of net farm income to more accurately consider operating conditions and assess long-term viability. The strength in this multi-year average lies in its ability to smooth out economic volatility in external markets. However, it doesn't account for opportunity costs, credit, asset depreciation, and household expenses or off-farm income. And then viability or poverty threshold is interesting. The viability gap is used within the European Union, and it is an indicator used to measure the difference between a farm's income and the average distance to farm viability, represented as a percentage across a viability threshold. That's hard to define. So they decided to decide what a standard successful operation looks like and create three alternative definitions of what that benchmark is and then measure it against that standard. We don't do that here in the US and instead use the poverty threshold, which is a limited resource farm household definition that is determined by having low sales and low household income for 2 years in a row. Low household income correlates with the national poverty level for a family of four with two children. Although not a traditional viability indicator per se, it's an important threshold as many farmers operate at a deficit. So next up, this is getting more exciting here out of the dry territory. Next slide. Integrated assessment tools. So the IDEA method is a diagnostic framework created by an interdisciplinary group of 30 French agriculture experts. The IDEA acronym is in French and translates roughly to farm sustainability indicators. The framework was designed for producers, policymakers, agricultural service providers to assess farm sustainability using 41 indicators divided over three key concepts: viability, livability, and environmental reproducibility. The IDEA method indicators were selected based on their scientific relevance, sensitivity, accessibility, relevance, and comprehensibility. Other qualifiers were selected indicators that include a holistic perspective of agriculture, considering economic, environmental, and social forces, including spatial, temporal, and ethical considerations to preserve cultural values and natural heritage. It's very French. And then it was a great model. And so Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada adapted the French IDEA method and research conducted in Quebec for the IDEA QC framework. Ultimately, it's a simplified version that was developed by institutional, academic, and professional advisors. They also consulted with farmers. And they utilized 30 of the original 41 indicators, primarily for use as a self-assessment tool to be used in conjunction with service providers. The service providers are trained to apply financial ratios, interview farmers, and collect survey responses to assess overall farm sustainability across three sections: ensuring farm viability and livability, preserving natural resources, responding to societal and territorial challenges. Each indicator is scored up to 5 points to identify opportunities for improvement, and it is designed as a discussion tool to work with a farm advisor to reach their goals. There's no total score given for this reason. Out of the three sections, one is ensuring farm viability and livability, more directly related to the viability discussion. And those 14 indicators, I'm just going to read them off because they're interesting, is self-financing capacity, expense control, debt ratio, labor productivity, human resource management, innovation approach, occupational health and safety, risk management, strategic management, economic transferability, transfer preparation, job satisfaction, pace of work, and pace of life. Next, please. So this goes a little bit more into theory, but it's in practice through a lot of organizations, and academics are pushing for more of this um, qualitative and participatory. It looks like I misspelled that top header. Qualitative and participatory. So when farmers were interviewed in a study conducted by Bruce and other researchers, many producers shared broader views on viability that integrated social and environmental sustainability of their enterprises, and how that perspective directly tied to their ability to continue farming and keep farmland in production over time. Although the idea models include well-being and quality life as part of their holistic model, there is a need for these indicators to be used more broadly or as part of a mix and match indicator toolkit that considers the mental health of farmers. So financial management and decision-making capacity argues that by understanding producers' financial management decision-making processes, service providers will be better able to support producers with appropriate financial tools to be successful. Another concept is intergenerational viability. The incoming generation are equipped with more resources for resilience, yet they are struggling to overcome systemic barriers such as access to capital and affordable farmland. Young and/or beginning farmers are building diversified operations with often higher education to leverage well-paid off-farm careers. They often integrate agritourism revenue or can access grant funding to support their farming projects. Young and beginning farmers are also demonstrating creative approaches to business through non-family farming models, which are less financially vulnerable than traditional small family farm operations. However, the Economic Research Service found that beginning farmers within the first 10 years of their operation often had lower rates of business survival than established farm operators. Young and beginning farmers had a higher survival rate if they accessed direct-to-consumer markets, such as farm stands, farmers markets, online markets, and community-supported agriculture models. Farm legacy. There's consistent evidence within family farm literature that motivations for farming are part of a larger set of personal lifestyle goals that involve connection to land, raising a family connected to the land, and preserving a farm legacy for future generations. The presence of these values indicates a strong sense of commitment and perseverance, even without farm profits to back it up. As a qualitative indicator, personal motivations around farm legacy and/or succession prove to be a strong litmus test for farm viability. And then natural resources management is integrated into the IDEA QC model, which adopts the theory into practice that preserving natural resources also correlates with farm viability. When interviewed, farmers responded that viability is synonymous with their environmental values and shared their entwined values of farmland protection, soil health, succession to the next generation, and ecological stewardship. Next, please. So some gaps in literature. There's definitely some missing elements in the academic discourse. Tisdale identified a need for a broader suite of contextual economic factors to assess viability. That included an analysis of economic returns and the inherent instability and uncertainty of those returns, and the availability and cost of financial capital. Tisdale's work underscores the reality that farms need to be more than profitable. They need to withstand unpredictable financial shocks and maintain enough liquidity to pivot or adapt to changing circumstances like we've seen in this past year. Diversity and representation. Food justice scholars argue that current definitions of farm viability are narrow and exclusionary and maintain structural inequities by perpetuating heteronormative assumptions that farm households are comprised of two intimate partners in business. Queer chosen family farms, cooperative farms, nonprofit farms, Tenant operated, absentee owned farms and other arrangements are growing in popularity and need tailored services to thrive. When social identities are not included in farm viability discussions, these communities are excluded by powerful actors and systems and are further prevented access to critical resources to support farm viability. For example, farmers of color continue to face systemic institutional barriers and heightened challenges to access land, capital, and credit. Dependence on off-farm income. Given the prevalence of dual household income with off-farm employment supplementing farm expenses, traditional single income farm accounting is no longer accurate or complete without a full analysis of household earnings. Most of the academics don't include this at all. Contribution to rural communities. Small farms help maintain essential regional agricultural infrastructure, support local economies, and preserve rural communities, even when those small farms are not profitable. Individual farms also depend on a critical mass of regional farms to support processing infrastructure and farm service businesses in urban and rural areas. Next, please. So, policy interventions are traditionally how we've tackled all of these barriers. The Farm Bill, as we know, had extensions in 2023 and in 2024, and we are now experiencing a looming government shutdown on September 30th. The historic Farm Bill is in peril. As we know, its ability to fund SNAP programs was further eroded by the big, beautiful bill which passed this summer. If the Farm Bill expires, the nutrition, rural development, credit, and conservation programs, traditional authorization, and funding mechanisms would cease to exist. They'd be picked up in solo bills or in other, Christmas tree bills. Some programs like crop insurance have permanent authorization in statute and would not be terminated. However, crop insurance and subsidies continue to benefit corporate agriculture and remain elusive to small farms. So in this changing federal funding landscape, federal grants that support farm viability have been impacted by the federal funding freeze, subsequent contract cancellations, lawsuits, and USDA staffing reductions that occurred this year. Many USDA programs appropriated through Congress were frozen, received early termination, and or reopened programs with modifications to align with the current administrative goals. Specifically, the change in diversity, equity, and inclusion to merit-based policies may result in a significant change of grant recipients and their demographics. State and local policies are in limbo. The extent of federal impacts to state and local programs and policies are presently unknown. We've seen the subsequent fallout of SNAP benefits and federal match programs. The full impact will be felt in 2026 and beyond after the Big Beautiful Bill rolls out in its entirety. The Statesman Journal reports that Oregon will lose out on $15 billion over the next 6 years. This is like across the board, not just agriculture. At present, this reversal of federal contracts has resulted in a state budget deficit of $373 million this year. So that concludes my presentation, ending kind of on a downer. Here's my information. I could drop it in the chat as well later. And then we will now move into some questions and a little discussion. So I think we have some time for maybe just a few clarifying questions. I saw that there were some things that popped up in the chat. I didn't read them off yet. I can look at those first, and then we're going to talk about what interventions we have access to in light of the changing federal landscape. Okay.
It looks like folks want you to share the report.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to do so. I think that Andrew already shared the version that I produced for the client, the Puget Sound Partnership. Um, they desired this as preliminary research for a toolkit for their policymakers to maintain viability of their farms because they recognize as a conservation-oriented organization that um, farmers are some of the best conservationists. But I can make sure that Andrew sends that back out.
Yeah,
Carrie,
we can do that. Yeah, Carrie, go ahead.
go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Carly. That was such a wealth of information. Could you go back to that graphic that had the three categories and the 14 items on one side? I
Mhm.
was gonna ask about there is one that the one it says economic transferability and transfer preparation. I was trying to understand better what that means. Is that what we traditionally calls the succession planning, or are they talking about the ability to develop a business and then sell it?
That's a good question. I focus mostly on the 14 indicators that were directly tied to viability, but there was a lot of information. So I believe that it was really focused on transfer succession planning, but
Okay.
also like, is the business going to be viable when it passes to the next generation or other arrangements? How can you maintain a viable business structure across the board? And largely, since this is an assessment tool, it's based on discussions and planning and not like, do you have the correct response, but are you thinking about these things and do you have a plan and have you considered the impacts of these future decisions?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I thought they might just be using different language and yeah, it's really an interesting graphic. I'd love to just like study it a little more.
There's a lot of reports available, especially about the IDEA-QC, the Canadian version, and I think it's the best model that I've seen, and it integrates both the financial, economic, environmental, cultural, and well-being, including just like safety of workers. I just really appreciated how holistic that model was. And I see Christy has a question. How do researchers deal with the farmers' hesitation to share real numbers vis-a-vis their income sales? Well, I think that they take a lot of time to build some trust, like doing farm visits, building some rapport, doing farm tours. Um, it's definitely an investment model of taking the time. And I think with that in mind, then they share more limited financial data, maybe not everything, but like kind of what we're working towards with viability efforts of having business plans or balance sheets. So it takes time. They won't share it right off the bat. And then I know we're limited on time, so then I'd like to go into our discussion question. Um, This is something that I'm still really thinking about as part of this project. What policy or regulatory interventions would have the greatest impact to support farmer viability, especially in a budget shortfall time or with more competition for limited funding? Curious of what your thoughts are and what directions your minds go. Christy.
One, the thing that comes to mind first is healthcare. If there were a way to provide healthcare for people in agriculture and everyone, of course, but that that is a major barrier to entrepreneurship. It's a major barrier to lots of innovation in the country.
Absolutely agreed. Do you see that as like increasing or like our state healthcare plan to include farmers or maybe increasing technical assistance so that farmers can access plans that are designed for farmers? Or even like using like say the Farm Bureau to create a larger enough plan to bring in farmers under a discounted option.
Yeah, any and all. I know that the West Coast states are looking at different banding together for different purposes. And so, yeah, I don't know what other people have come across talking to farmers. I don't need to dominate this question.
Well, we can't solve all of these things, but I think that it's like thinking about what ways can we organize, what options do we have, and I think that sometimes policy or regulatory, which can possibly include deregulation. It's very controversial, but I think that there are ways to like, well, what does work for farmers? How can we manage our values of the environment or farm workers, but maintain viability? Like, what options are there to keep farms viable? Any other thoughts? I know that Andrew wants to keep the some time for future planning as well.
Oh, I'm happy with this conversation. I think, yeah, this is what we're here to do, is to connect and these kind of building off of what you presented. So if other thoughts on these interventions would be great. I see Jude in the chat here.
Nice. I'd be curious to hear what friends and family farmers learned from that process.
Yeah, the health insurance one, that's great.
Yeah, I don't have anything definitive to contribute, but I would say that there are any kind of development of policy or regulations that would help fill gaps between reducing costs and improving efficiencies, or so, it would be like subsidize filling that gap between providing a farmer a livable wage, but still integrating a training program to effectively develop a trained workforce. There's just this gap, and then we can't sell affordable food at a price that provides a livable wage for our farmers. So we have this gap again. Um, so I don't have a definitive name to put on that, but they're just gaps that are really barriers to being profitable businesses. They
Mhm.
can't scale up their business without getting more help, but they don't make enough money to hire help. And if they do, they can't follow all the rules because they can't afford all the expenses related to being an employer. So it's just this like vicious circle that prevents forward movement.
Absolutely. And Christy brought up the equipment sharing, like in your program, Carrie, and just coordinating timing, the efficiency, another part of it. Like meat processing, everybody needs the service at the same time. How can you stagger these things if they're so time dependent? I'm writing an action agenda based off this research for the same client, and I'm talking about all these same things. It's hard to wrap my head around. Well, because there's such big creative ideas, but how do we practically implement them, and what successes are there that we can, push forward rather than reinventing the wheel? It's a big part of it too, of like how can we be like really outside of the box and support farmers, but get it to work within the wheels of, bureaucracy.
Christina.
Hey, took me a second to figure out how to unmute. Um, I think in these conversations, it's really interesting to think about how small farmers are different than other small businesses. And well, we're not even talking about small farmers, but how is farming different than other businesses, right? Like that's why we're in this space. So like 100% healthcare, and that is every small business. So let's not just for farmers, like let's collaborate with other small business oriented, again, I'm using that word small because that's where my mind goes, but like business oriented supports for healthcare, right? So like just like that twist is always, so what is it about farming that's different than I always use the restaurant industry as the like parallel because like, oh man, like we all know restaurants fail and fail and fail and fail. But then one in a million makes it and like you can actually get an investor in a restaurant, but you could never get an investor in your farm, not in the same way restaurants could. So I guess I don't really have an answer to this question, but like how are farms truly different than other businesses? I mean, it is that I think that physical location, the identity of every farm is so locked into its physical location. And I just think there's something there. Like, you know, you can move warehouses, you can move restaurants, you can move a farm, of course, but it really changes. And so I don't know. I think there's something around farm viability that is missing that core like conversation like around like what is so different about farms, if anything. I mean that compared to other businesses. So I just want to, if people have answers to that, I'd love to hear them.
Good points, Christina. Makes me think of things like easements, these types of land protection things that keep farms in production and reduce those land costs for producers, things like antitrust laws, anti-monopoly stuff. These kind of bigger things focused on protecting that economy and the land base. I see a couple hands, Holly and then Matt.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that a lot of times I hear from my farmers that they have trouble with accounting that other small businesses don't have just because they're diversified vegetables and they have each crop has a different cost associated with it. And so if you have 150 crops, that can turn accounting into a real nightmare. This is just like I have not had experience. I'm not a farmer, but this is something that my farmers report to me. They're always looking for someone to help them figure out how to do their accounting.
Well, also there's so much projection, I'm guessing, and you don't know what you're actually going to get.
We'll do Matt, and then maybe we can move on and kind of talk about the next steps for this space. Good discussion, and we'll keep having them. Matt.
Yeah, I think it's just really hard to think about like policy interventions when we're, like federally and at the state level, there's just such budgetary issues or just unwillingness to look at the kinds of things that would be helpful. But two things that come up in my mind are advocating again when it comes up again for things like the disaster resilience grants that OCFSN put on that just got kind of like, maybe small amounts out to farmers, but like $5,000 can make a big difference in the long term, of somebody's operation if they're able to purchase some equipment that makes them more efficient, et cetera, et cetera. And the other thing that I think about is student loan forgiveness. So seeing farming as public service. I think New York State has something like that. Maybe other states have done it too, where it's like, I guess there is a budgetary impact to that, but it's less of like we have to find this money to get it out the door, but less of like more of like we won't see this money come in the door later on. So I don't know how much that's a state or a federal thing, but I know New York State has done something like that.
Nice. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Carly, and everyone for engaging, but big round of applause for Carly. Thanks for doing
Thank
this
you.
presentation. Really appreciate you and y'all for being here. And we're gonna we'll share that report back out. And let's see here. Pull up these notes here just so I have a big
These are
sense of
my upcoming learning circles. Just wanted to put that out there since I have some events coming up. Um, I have two in Central Point and one in Cove. So I know they're way out in rural Oregon, but if you have contacts out in there, and I know there's some people in the room who represent these areas, please do help get the word out. I'm newly offering programming in Jackson and Josephine counties, and it's a rural community, so any help getting the word out, and I really appreciate it. These are free, catered, really special events, and I can provide gift cards for folks that need assistance to attend. Christy's way out there. Maybe I'll see ya.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, and don't hesitate to use the Farming for the Future list for those events to get that word out.
Yep.
We'll share the next we don't fully have an agenda yet for our next meeting, but it will follow our plan. And we are let's see here. Yeah, we'll do maybe a programmatic update and talk about some collaborative projects folks maybe be interested in working on, but we'll dial it in. And yeah, don't forget to sign up for the convening. We're at the end of this week, we're going to start reviewing folks who aren't OCMSM member organizations to make sure we get a real good diverse group of people out there. So get that registration put in there, get yourself signed up, and yeah, I think that's really it. Yeah, I don't want to start a whole new conversation with 3 minutes, but yeah, thank you to Matt and Rich and Jeffrey for helping think this through and getting this space back together. And we'll be sharing out the notes and the recording and keeping talking about farm viability in this space and convening you awesome folks doing this important work. So have a great afternoon. Later.
Bye, everyone.